This is going to be an instructional video on how to disassemble the Sear assembly on a CZ-75. First thing that we always want to do is check and make sure that the gun is unloaded. Oh, surprised you there. That's actually a fake round, but that's how those kind of accidents happen. So, first thing we'll want to do, drop the magazine and of course check and make sure that the gun is unloaded. Next we'll go ahead and remove the slide. We won't be using that, I'll set that aside. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is lift up this retaining spring, and you'll notice that there's a coil spring around the shaft of the safety, and it has an arm that extends up into the Sear assembly here. So I'm just going to use a razor knife. You can try a screwdriver also, and just lift that up. Okay, what I've done is put the razor knife underneath the spring, and now I'm just going to lift up on the spring and gently remove the safety. Kind of hold the spring up, otherwise it'll catch. And there's your safety. And here's the Sear assembly. Now we're going to disassemble this to get at the Sear. Now you notice here's your lever that lifts up for the firing pin block. And between that and the side here, there's a small spring also that we're going to have to make sure that we keep an eye on. So what we're going to do here is just use a punch and push that pin all the way out. Now you see I've done this on a towel. You'll want some kind of a surface where you can keep track of the small parts. Here's that very small pin that or spring I was telling you about right there. Here's the spring that we had to lift up the arm on. And here is the Sear assembly. Okay, as you can see, I've already removed the hammer and the disconnect. And that's pretty straightforward. All we do is you punch out a couple of pins, and the hammer, the disconnect, and also the flat spring here comes out. There's one other little part right here you can see, and this is the safety stop. It allows the detent to catch when you're flipping the safety on and off. And that goes right in here. You'll find it. It's spring loaded, so it's one of these small parts that you'll want to keep track of. Okay, now we're going to be reassembling the Sear. I have here a Cajun Gunworks Sear. It's probably the finest Sear that's available for the CZ-75 type of weapons. It's actually capable of giving you a 1911 type of trigger off of this CZ-75, and I highly recommend them. We've got all the parts that are going to be required, and you can see I've got a cloth down here so we don't lose them. We have the spring assembly, this little spring, and that is used here for the part that pushes up onto the safety, the hammer safety. I'm sorry, firing pin safety. We have the spring and also the Sear. So we're going to be assembling those. Now on this paw that lifts up and pushes the firing pin block out of the way, you'll notice there's two sides. One of it has a very slight cutout, and that's where that spring is going to actually go. This is probably the most difficult part of the reassembly. Once you get this part in, everything else will pretty much slip together. Okay, I finished reassembling it, and the way you can tell it's been done correctly is you can lift up on this and it's spring loaded back down. Now remember, the way I started this was I brought the Sear in from underneath, came in from this side with the pin, caught that main spring there, continued on, and then put that spring in here, or put the this little paw in here that lifts up, and put the spring against the frame. and push the pin the rest of the way through. It took me about 10 minutes. It just takes a little bit of patience and technique, and once you're done, you're all set to go. The Sear here, as you can see, is spring loaded, so we know that that's correct. It moves freely, and this part lifts up and snaps back down, so you know that final spring, that little one in there, is in the correct position. Okay, now we're going to start the reassembly here. I'm going to drop the hammer and the strut in, putting that over the disconnect, lining up the holes, dropping in the pin. Then we're going to take the spring, that goes in here, and then last will be a keeper here. Okay, you can see I've got that pin put in. Now, I didn't show it earlier, but there's a small pin that goes in the frame that stops the hammer pin from coming out. And it's just a little small slot. Usually takes you a couple tries to get it. Okay, as you can see, I was able to drop that pin into place. Okay, the next thing will be to put the little spring and catch in for the safety. And you see it's got those two little arms that come up. And in mine there's a little hole in the frame, and it just slides into position there. Okay, I now have the little catch in there for the safety. Now I can go ahead and put in the Sear assembly. And that just requires pulling back the hammer a little bit until you can line up the holes, and dropping the safety in. Okay, I now have the safety started, and it'll only go part way because now that spring that's by the Sear is blocking it. So I'm going to go ahead and lift that up, just a little screwdriver, and then I can continue to slide it a little bit farther. Okay, I've got the safety pretty much all the way on. You can see what kind of gap I have here. Now, remember that little spring-loaded piece that was right here in the frame? Okay, just pull that paw back a little bit, push the safety in the rest of the way, and the trigger, the Sear assembly is in there. The last part of this puzzle is this flat spring. Okay, what I've done now is I actually had to remove this pin in order to get this flat spring in there. It's just a question of pushing the assembly up, putting the spring in, and then dropping the pin into place, and then releasing the pressure. The final thing is going to be putting this pin back in here. I always save this to the end because it falls out all the time when you're reassembling the pistol anyhow. And it's just held in there by a little bit of tension. Okay, now we're just going to go ahead and reattach the grip panels. Those are no big deal, just a couple of screws. That. Slide. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope it helps you out when you disassemble and reassemble your CZ-75.